Namaste. So, we have finished the first 6 chapters of the Gita, essays on the Gita. Sixth chapter, we can say technically, is the beginning of the second chapter of the Gita. Sixth chapter of the essays on the Gita. And the first 5 chapters give us the background, which is chapter 1, essentially. And then the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, all these 4 chapters are basically chapter 2 of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So as I always say, Shri Krishna, when he spoke, it was the exigency of war. It was on the battlefield. And there are things which did need to be elaborated subsequently. He spoke in a certain context, and there was a purpose which went beyond merely telling Arjuna to fight or not to fight. If that was the case, second chapter, first half would have been enough, because he explained to him logically that whether you consider the Kshatriya dharma, you should fight. Whether you consider the Aryan culture, you should fight. And all these considerations about death and all these other aspects are really not to be considered, because this is a kind of delusion in which human beings live because of attachment. They look at life in certain ways. But if you look at the truth of things, well, there is no such thing as death, because if you look at it materially, then there is no need to grieve for death, because it's something which happens to everybody. And if you look at it spiritually, well, the form dies, but the soul lives forever. So essentially, it should be enough to convince anyone who is on the battlefield, ready with his bow and arrow to fight. But naturally, the purpose of the master of the Gita, Lord of the Gita, is much more. He thought of all of us who are going to come, who are going to face different kinds of battles. And now he starts giving the principle behind why he has said what he has said. It's not just about giving an immediate argument. So there we see from chapter second half onward, there starts building up the entire philosophical background of the Gita, which we see in Essays on the Gita from chapter 7 onwards. And the first few chapters, which means chapter 7, 8, 9, even to an extent 10, form a little difficult reading. It's almost like you are going on a nice level road, climbing to the mountain. There is a gentle incline. You're happy. Suddenly you come across a sharp incline, because he brings a word which we are normally not familiar with, Sankhya. Of course, we have heard this word, and Sankhya has meant different things at different point of time. Then Yoga. And then Sri Aurobindo brings in Sankhya, Yoga and Vedanta. So what really are these terms? Sri Aurobindo explains this in chapter 7 of Essays on the Gita. But just to give a brief background, this background is important, that these are schools of Indian philosophy. So Indian philosophy has 6 main schools, out of which 3 are hardly in consideration now, and 3 are still used, accepted as prominent in Indian thought. So one of the earliest school is Nyaya. Nyaya, literally if you say, it means justice. But Nyaya is all about logic. So it was a school, ultimately the purpose of all these schools was, what is the nature of reality? So Nyaya is about logic, and it says how you can logically arrive at what this reality is. And it's a school, Gautam Rishi, he is the one who has given this, who has written the whole treatise on Nyaya, Nyaya Sutras. And he describes that through logical analysis, through various kinds of arguments, then through anuman, through guesswork, through praman of different kinds, pratyaksh praman, then anuman, then aptavakya praman, praman of those who have, like for instance, a rishi who has seen a truth. Like in our case, if a scientist has done a research and he says this is so you tend to accept it. So there are different kinds of praman, evidences. So this was the logical school, which was part of Indian thought, one of the earliest. But very interestingly, the general mind of India has discarded it, because it can take you up to a point. It cannot take you to the ultimate nature of reality. So they understood it long back that, well, logically you will reach at agnosticism. That's the last word. Whatever be the reason, it's not much in prominence now. So the other school is Vaisheshika. It's about the nature of atoms. So atoms constitute reality, which of course, and atoms and Paramanu, which is more smaller particles, and they built all this about Panch Mahabhut, the five elements, elemental states of matter, how they come together, which is so true even scientifically. These five elemental states of matter are the five fundamental forces which weave in the texture of atom. So that school also was very limited. It could not tell the ultimate nature of reality. It's Kanad Sutras, and so that has also been discarded. The third was Purva Mimamsa, which is, it's also called a just Mimamsa. But Purva Mimamsa, which said we don't care about all these things. It's like a doctor giving medicine, having results. It's not science. It's pseudoscience. All medicine is statistics. Statistics cannot be really technically science. Because statistics would mean that, well, if 80% or 50% people take this, they get well. But 50% don't get well. That's what happened with the vaccines. That so many people get well, so many people have side effects. So it leaves us nowhere. So statistics, very strictly speaking, if you go to it's not a clear-cut evidence. It's very indirectly pointing towards things. So in Mimamsa, the method was, well, we don't care about those things, but if you do certain rituals, certain practices, certain homa, certain kind of yagya means outer rituals, certain mantras, you will get these results. So it was like medicine. So you do certain things, the result will come. Why it is coming? We can't say that. And the Gita discards it, if you look at it very strongly. So that is all about ritualistic ways of life which bring certain results. So that's Mimamsa or Purva Mimamsa. So that also largely it has become defunct. Nobody actually practices, because over a period of time, even the mother made a very interesting remark when somebody asked about the Vedic rishis and things like that. She said, do you mean actually physically building a fire and doing the yagya now in that way? Humanity has moved far ahead. Recently someone was asking me that how about having something to do with the Vedas in Auroville. So he said, but Auroville itself is a Vedagni and Yagya. Auroville you don't need to really literally light a fire and do some mantra and do homa to have Auroville. Auroville has gone way, way, way ahead of all those things. I know it will probably maybe hurt some sentiment, but it's true that mainstream Indian thought has moved way ahead. There are people who follow it, like people can follow the Nyaya Sutras. It's nobody in India, that's why such a wideness developed. Then the three schools which now Gita synthesizes, three sort of doesn't directly discard, but more or less it enriches them, and we'll come to it when we come to it. But the three schools which continue to remain prevalent, it wants to synthesize them. Because one of the work of the avatar, we see like Sri Aurobindo is synthesizing Vedantic schools, the Tantra schools, the modern material science, because it's one of the work. So one of the work of Sri Krishna is to synthesize the schools which were prevalent at that time. So Sankhya is one of them which was prominent. The other was Yoga, and the third is Vedanta. So what is Sankhya? Numbers. So what Sankhya says, interestingly, it's an atheistic school, strictly speaking. So it doesn't believe in God. So what it says, how do you explain reality? It's just nature which is unfolding. So if nature is unfolding, how has consciousness emerged? Now when we look at these writings, we will see modern science is right now laboring and struggling to understand consciousness. Sankhya explained it in its own unique way, long, long back. So it is nature which is unfolding, and nature has various principles, 24 principles, some would say 23 principles, and how the senses and the various five elements, they interact with each other, and then there are reactions to it, and that's how you can understand everything on the basis of nature. But then the problem is, how does consciousness emerge? Because nature is mechanical, it says nature is mechanical, it's Jada Prakriti. So where does consciousness come from? So it brought in this other aspect of Purusha. A Purusha is not God. He just like, we can use the word cosmic intelligence. Where it has come from, that's not Sankhya's business. So this intelligence, when it is identified with Prakriti, Prakriti assumes that like when I look into the mirror will show my reflection. So Prakriti begins to reflect the Purusha or the nature of Prakriti, which is of three gunas, the Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, it gets reflected into the Purusha. So both way, on one side, the Purusha gets bound by the movements of Prakriti, thinks I am this, thinks I am that. Who thinks that will come to in a moment. And as far as Prakriti is concerned, it becomes conscious little bit when the Purusha reflects into it. So even consciousness is explained on a purely mechanical basis. It's mechanical Prakriti. But when the light of the Purusha falls upon it, its intelligence or light falls upon it, it begins to seem intelligent. It acts as if intelligent. But basically it's nothing but brain and all this stuff. So problem of Sankhya was that what about the multiple Purushas? Because if there is only one Purusha, then one yogi drawing from nature would automatically, everything should cease to be. But that's not the case. So Sankhya brings in the element of ahankar, the ego principle. So this ego principle is the one which makes it seem there are many. There is you and me and this and that and all different many because of the principle of ahankar which is operating in the field of nature. It is also a product of nature. But it's a seeming, it's not a reality. So what about the force that is operating in Prakriti? That comes from Mahat, the higher principle of. So that's how it explained very neatly, and the Purusha is there as a witness. When it gazes into, its light falls into nature, nature begins to stir. When it withdraws from nature, nature enters into a state of equilibrium. And so the path for man is withdrawal from action. And by withdrawing from action and internalizing, looking within, turning this consciousness, intelligence within, rather than outside, there will be liberation. So it's a logical system, it appeals to many, and we can see its glimpses even in the Gita, in the Buddhist doctrine, and to an extent in Jainism also. Slight differences, we will not go into that. So this is the Sankhya school which was very prominent at that point of time. The Purusha and Prakriti, that's how it operates. Then this other thing which is there is yoga. So in the Gita, yoga, now we have many sense of yoga. For example, now we have the asanas as yoga. But the Gita does not use the yoga in that sense, and the Indian school of philosophy did not use the word yoga in that sense. Yoga meant that not just by internalizing, but by your actions, you can arrive at the higher reality, and the end is samadhi. So it brought in not only an individual self or Paramatma, and by action, first yama, niyama, then by swadhyaya, ishwar, pranidhan, you have to do certain things, set of do's and don'ts, through which you can slowly withdraw from, asan, pranayam, yam, niyam, asan, pranayam, dhyan, dharana, all this, you can slowly withdraw into that ultimate reality and get mukti. So both give mukti, but each has its own meaning within it. So yoga was essentially, there are certain set of actions which you have to do. It's not enough that you withdraw inside, and through that you can arrive at liberation. And Patanjali is credited with this, just as Sankhya is credited to Kapil Muni. So Patanjali for the yoga school of Indian philosophy, also known as Raja Yoga. And the last is Vedanta. So Vedanta is essentially, it's called Vedanta, the end of the Vedas or end of knowledge. It, just as Purva Mimamsa takes up the Karma Kand aspect of Veda, ritualistic sacrifices, Uttar Mimamsa, as it is sometimes called, Vedanta takes the knowledge aspect of the Vedas. So the Upanishads are part of that. Upanishads are the treatises of Vedanta. It says, let's discard all the unnecessary stuff, let's get back to the reality, and through knowledge we can arrive at that. So these were the 6 schools, out of which these last 3 are very prominent. I think it was, all is attributed to different people. So now during the time of Gita, these 3 schools are very prominent. So when people spoke about yoga, they meant Raj Yoga. And they spoke about Kapil Muni, his Sankhya Yoga. And they spoke about Vedanta, which had already come, the name with B, the Rishi's name, not Brihadaranya, but similar name. So these were the schools, and Gita takes them up, because when Sri Krishna is building up a philosophy, a new truth based on his own revelation, he must fit into taking up all the other schools of thought. That's how India could build a very integral, vast, Catholic superstructure of life and God. Because both streams were there. One was individual paths. Sankhya was discovered. Yoga was discovered. But equally there were efforts to take them up and integrate them. It was needed, because otherwise cults and sects would have formed. This is greater, that is greater. So they were all brought under one umbrella. Just to complete the picture. So Sankhya speaks about Purusha and Prakriti. Upanishads of Vedanta, it speaks about not one but two Purushas. So it says that on one side there is this Purusha reflected in nature, but there is another Purusha who is always free, immobile. So they are the two birds. But the Gita brings in something very new, because it remains, idea of multiple souls, all this remains irreconcilable. You can't reconcile. That's why monistic Advaita, again in Vedanta there were three schools, we're not going into that, Dvaita, Advaita and Visishta Advaita. So the problem was, does an individual soul exist or doesn't exist? Because if there is no individual soul, then all this effort at yoga seems so redundant and odious. Because none is bound, none is free, there is no one. But Shri Krishna says categorically, there is something which survives. Whereas on the other hand, he takes his stand upon Sankhya as well as yoga, where you don't, or the Vedanta, it's a Vedantic teaching where you don't talk so much about individual souls. And we see that Sri Aurobindo also accepts that about individual souls. It's a very important element in the entire yogic philosophy. So where do individual souls come from? Shri Krishna says, there are not two but three Purushas. So there is the Sharobhav, all this he'll describe in detail, where there is the reflection of the Purusha in nature, and therefore, you have this sense of multiplicity. There is the divine presence in matter, if you want to put it. There is the Akshara, which is like the Upanishads, the second Purusha, who is immobile, witness above. But there is the Uttam Purusha, the Purushottama. Now this one change in the Gita brings many wonderful aspects. So Uttama Purusha, who takes both these into himself. That means the world is not cut off from God. It exists in God. It exists by God. It exists for God. So it changes that aspect completely. What about multiple souls? They are anshas of Purushottama. So Shri Krishna says, Mamaeva ansha. They are my ansha. How are they brought into existence? Para prakriti. So there is a divine supernature beyond this lower nature. That's why the Gita is such an important work, because it reconciles many of these traditional ideas of Sankhya, Vedanta. Even today we see many people following the Vedanta and trying to interpret Gita exclusively based on the Upanishadic idea. But the Gita has brought something new. That's why it's sometimes known as the 13th Upanishad. Sri Aurobindo brings out something still new. That's how that aspect of avatar is there. So these multiple souls are not just reflections because of the ego self. There is behind the ego self a true soul. And that's we see in Shri Krishna. Sri Aurobindo brings it out very powerfully. That's the psychic being. And this is the background that he builds. Because then only all the rest will make a meaning, make sense. Because if there is no individual soul, yoga has no meaning. Who is bound? It's an illusion. It's an ego. But I am not the ego. In any case, it's a temporary thing. After I go, I go. So these are tricks of, these are conundrums of philosophy, which we see coming up in Buddhist thought and everywhere else. Because Buddhism speaks about rebirth. But then who is reborn? Of course, it tries to explain all this very, it's a mental gymnastic. But I always used to wonder, then who is reborn? If there is no individual soul, who is reborn? And if there is no ultimate reality, then how this has come into existence? So all these aspects are there. And Shri Krishna gives a new meaning to the word Maya. So Maya in Vedanta, traditional Vedanta, is just a power that makes things appear as many. But Shri Krishna says it is my Maya. So it brings a new dimension, that it is the divine will which has brought out this creation and the sense of multiplicity. So all these are important aspects of the of Sri Krishna's teachings, and why this teaching is still relevant, and it is the basis on which we see the higher teaching of Sri Aurobindo comes up. So as I said, this is the philosophical basis. From here, Sri Aurobindo starts taking us on an uphill climb, and he doesn't want us to take a motor car. He wants us to walk step by step. And why he does it, I have a very personal take on it. Because why doesn't Shri Krishna simply say, look here, Sankhya is this, Vedanta is this, but basically I am going to tell you that there are three Purushas. There is a God above. All philosophies and religions which have done this kind of short-circuiting of spiritual truth, they have ended up either in a very narrow cult, creed, or a messed up understanding. For instance, everybody says God is one. But see what happens. When you don't elaborate, when you don't bring it in the fullness, then I can build an image of my own ego, aggrandized, and say, this is God. And Sri Aurobindo speaks about it in Synthesis of Yoga. The danger that human beings have built God in their own image, exaggerated, aggrandized image. Even here, people would say, Mother has spoken about it. They are worshipping an image of themselves which they project and call it as me. Mother will punish. Mother will be angry. Mother has repeatedly said, I don't punish, and whom shall I punish? And anger is foreign. But people say that even now you'll hear. It's because of mother. Mother got angry. Mother is testing me. What is mother testing you? She knows us much better than ourselves. So all these conceptions we have built because when we don't enter into the detailed understanding of what God is. So Shri Krishna is not going to take us in a car where we will sleep and suddenly we'll say, oh, we have reached this point so lovely. He will take us by the walk. So step by step we have to walk with Sri Krishna in the Gita. Then only it will make the full sense, and also it will stretch our consciousness. That's how I see. Gita is itself, reading Gita becomes a practice of yoga because our consciousness strains and stretches. Something which I have experienced even with Synthesis of Yoga. That had he made it over simple, then we will not strain. And that's one reason why we should read these books and go through it in a little more detail rather than simply, okay, we know it all and okay, mother is everything, so we don't need to really. No. We have to be prepared and see how he's taking us. So, mother says at one point, generally, I should come at the end of a human quest. She is leading us, but we don't know. It's only when you have covered a certain journey that you are really face to face with the Divine Mother. Then you say, she was leading me. But if we go suddenly, we will end up saying things like, oh, she's an excellent organizer. Even if you look at outwardly, look at the ashram, she's a wonderful lady like that. Or somebody would say she's a foreigner, or she had siddhis. It's only when you are led and prepared. That's why reading Sri Aurobindo is even a preparation to reach the mother, to bow at her feet. So here is Sankhya and Yoga, and we'll just read a few passages. The teacher makes at once a distinction, the very first paragraph, which is of the utmost importance for the understanding of the Gita, the distinction of Sankhya and Yoga. Such is the intelligence, the intelligent knowledge of things and will, which is where we see the intelligence, the Purusha aspect which Sankhya speaks of. Declared to thee in the Sankhya. Here now, This in the yoga, for if thou art in yoga, by this intelligence, O son of Pritha, thou shalt cast away the knowledge, bondage of works. So why he is saying so? In Sankhya, you don't go through works. You turn inside and you turn this intelligence away, then you are no more deluded. Basically, what is the problem of Arjuna? He is deluded. His problem is this will die, that will live, he will win. He says this is all a play of Prakriti. Sankhya will tell us this entirely a play of Prakriti. It doesn't bring in the element of Maya. It simply says Prakriti. So turn away from Prakriti, turn within and discover the self. But then why work? So Shri Krishna is saying that I have told you from the Sankhya point of view, now I'll tell you how you can arrive at the same knowledge through work. So it starts with this. So that's the basis. So, of course, then Sri Aurobindo explains, page 69, what then are the Sankhya and Yoga of which the Gita speaks? They are certainly not the systems which have come down to us under these names as enunciated respectively in the Sankhya Karika of Ishwara Krishna and the Yoga aphorisms of Patanjali. This Sankhya is not the system of the Karikas, at least as that is generally understood. So Gita takes up, because it's a practical book, it takes up how it is understood as of now. That basically there is Prakriti and there is Purusha, and Purusha can withdraw from Prakriti. This aspect is common. So it doesn't go into the details of the 24 principles. It passingly mentions them. At least as that is generally understood, for the Gita nowhere for a moment admits the multiplicity of Purushas as a primal truth of being, and it affirms emphatically what the traditional Sankhya strenuously denies, the one as self and Purusha, that one again as the Lord, Ishvara or Purushottama, and Ishvara as the cause of the universe. So Sankhya denies that. It's an atheistic school. The traditional Sankhya is, to use our modern distinction, atheistic. So we can see how Indian thought has developed. This is also very interesting. Why India could accept and accommodate the non-believer? Because in its beginning, it had schools of thought. Totally a logical, rational analyst also it could accommodate, because Nyaya school. The material scientist, it accepted. He is also a seeker of truth in his own way. Because it grew up like this, therefore in India you have this kind of wideness, Catholicity. Nor is this the yoga system of Patanjali, for that is a purely subjective method of Raj Yoga, an internal discipline, limited, rigidly cut out. So you have the 8 limbs, you have to do this step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, go on to step 8. Severely and scientifically graded, by which the mind is progressively stilled and taken up into samadhi, so that we may gain the temporal and eternal results of this self-exceeding. So in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, work is there. You have to change from those works which bind you heavily to works which are more of a sattvic nature. So you have the 5 yamas and 5 niyamas. But eventually you have to drop it off, because the goal is samadhi and escape. But the yoga of the Gita is a large, flexible and many-sided system with various elements. And then he says something which equally applies to Sri Aurobindo's yoga. This yoga, next line, this yoga does not adopt any strict and scientific gradation, but is a process of natural soul development. It seeks, by the adoption of a few principles of subjective poise and action, to bring about a renovation of the soul. What a word he is using. Renovation of the soul. Why? Because it is completely submerged in ignorance. So it's like a beautiful building, but everywhere there is some cracks, some patches have started coming out. Ignorance. So it needs to be renovated. It has to be reminded who you truly are. But the Gita accepts that there are many types of humanity. So what it says to Arjuna would apply to 75%. But there is a kind of humanity which is more philosophical oriented. So it will not tell them that go and do this battle, even if your heart has changed. To a Buddha, it will say go and seek the origin of suffering, because that's what is moving Buddha. So it is it doesn't have a very strict gradation that everybody has to follow in a similar way, a similar pattern. That's why Gita is so liberating from any cult or sectarian point of view. And a sort of change, ascension or new birth out of the lower nature into the divine. The fulcrum it uses, of course, is the Swabhava and Swadharma. Accordingly, its idea of samadhi is quite different from the ordinary notion of the yogic trance. And while Patanjali gives to works only an initial importance for moral purification and religious concentration, the Gita goes so far as to make works the distinctive characteristic of yoga. So these apply to Sri Aurobindo's yoga also. So Sri Aurobindo's yoga works, you start with work, you continue with works as you grow in consciousness, you still continue in work even after the liberation. You continue to work, even through the work you arrive at the transformation of nature, transformation of the instruments. Because the world is a manifestation of the divine. So, on page 70, last 6-7 lines from below, it defines yoga. By yoga is meant the selfless devotion of all the inner as well as outer activities as a sacrifice to the Lord of all works. This he will develop in the 3rd chapter of the Gita, which means the 10th chapter of Essays on the Gita. But right now, what is yoga? He is defining so beautifully. What are we supposed to do? Selfless devotion of all the inner. Inner means thought, feelings, will, impulses, everything. And as well as the outer activities. Outer activities, cooking, medicine, cleaning the floor, arranging the flowers, doing physical work, all the different kinds of activities. How do we do it? As a sacrifice to the Lord of all works. We are doing it for the mother, we are doing it for the divine. We are not doing it for any personal gain. Offered to the eternal as master of all the souls, energies and austerities. Yoga is the practice of the truth of which knowledge gives the vision. So now comes, where does the knowledge of the Sankhya comes in? Now comes another jalebi. By jalebi I mean a twist in the tail. So Shri Krishna is telling Arjun, works is important. Through works you will arrive at the knowledge. But he also tells him that you must do works with knowledge. So Arjun is going to ask him, naturally, Sir, please don't confuse and bewilder my intelligence. On one side you are saying works is important, engage in action. On the other side you are saying knowledge is important, therefore first win knowledge. What am I supposed to do? Because he still believes that first I must gain knowledge by the Sankhya method. Then I will engage in works. But that's not the case. Because even with Sri Aurobindo, people have this idea that no, first we must find the divine. After that we can speak about transformation, we can speak about manifestation. But that's not the case. The two go together, which is so difficult for human consciousness to normally understand. That okay, first I'll find the divine by whatever means. I'll go to Ramana Ashram, I'll do meditation there, I'll realize the self. Then okay, I'll participate in Sri Aurobindo's yoga. But the problem is if you follow that path, then by the time you come back, the instrument and nature will not be ready at all. So you'll realize the self, but that self-realization is by suppressing the natural tendencies, the instruments of action. And when you come back, it's like you are a towering giant inwardly, but a dwarf outside. So you cannot. That's why in this yoga, they go together. And that, of course, Sri Krishna will develop at a point of time. So, of which knowledge gives the vision, and its practice has for its motor power a spirit of illumined devotion, of calm or fervent consecration to that which knowledge sees to be the highest. So practically it means that first of all we must know to whom are we dedicating these works. So for us, very simple, the Divine Mother. Who is the Divine Mother? Not just the mother of Sri Aurobindo Ashram. Okay. She is the one who dwells in every creature. She is the one who holds the entire creation within her being. She is the one who has become all these things. So this understanding should always be there, conception of the Divine Mother, that she is within me but also within everybody. It will change our dealings with the universe. And all things are in her. So it's not just enough to say, yes, yes, I know, to the mother, and then we think only of. She is embodied herself as the mother who, in Pondicherry, Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Auroville, we know that story. But she, in her vaster consciousness, that's how Sri Aurobindo describes, she holds the other two vaster ways of her being in her individual consciousness. What are the vaster ways of her being? Transcendent and the universal. So both of them she holds in the individual. And if we only concentrate on the outer individual personality, which is important as a door, but we forget the other two vaster ways of being, then we limit her. This is how we see that religions have been formed sometimes. We must always remember that this is holding within her the key to transformation, and what she is, all that glory we see revealed in Savitri, just as the mother reveals the glory of the Lord in prayers and meditations. But what are the truths of Sankhya? And that he describes that how by analytical process it arrived at Purusha and Prakriti, and Prakriti is constituted of 3 gunas. We'll have occasion to talk about it in detail, so I'll skip this part. Prakriti is constituted of 3 gunas or essential modes of energy. They studied, analyzed, and the rishis of the Sankhya system. Ultimately, Kapil Muni has given it proper shape as sutras. But he is not the only one who spoke about this. There have been other seers, just like in Jainism. Mahavir Jain is the one who established this as a religion, we may use the word, or a way of life. But basically the first person is Rishabdev, and they all spoke of the same thing. But they were not powerful enough to propound this teaching the way Vardhman, Mahavir, Lord Vardhman Mahavir could do it. So similarly, Kapil Muni is attributed with putting the sutras. But it is not that he is the one who has originated the Sankhya system. We read also, Sri Aurobindo takes somebody else's name, Ishwara Krishna. At least I have not come across. I'm sure there must be, but I have never tried to Google search, I said. If you Google search Ishwar Krishna, it will take you to the nearest store. Ishwar Krishna store in Pondicherry. So, best is. So, he says that basically the Prakriti is of 3-fold modes and it applies everywhere. There's the beauty of this Triguna Prakriti. I have used it so much in my psychological practice. You can see human beings who are prone to tamas. And this tendency that take everybody together, teach them meditation, it doesn't work. Somebody who is prone to tamas will end up in sleeping and he'll feel good. Sleep is very rejuvenating any which way. Whether you sleep in a meditation room or you sleep in your bed, it's rejuvenating. So people will come out that, oh, he is a very good meditator. But basically a tamasic person should be sent to work because rajas is important for him. Similarly, a sattvic person. So sattvic person has his own idea. We become very scrupulous, over-conscientious about certain things. You have to explain to him that there is something greater than sattva, which is the divine consciousness, which acts in freedom and infinity. So this is how tamas, rajas, sattva, they bind us. Tamas binds by a mechanical sort of routine, by inertia, which does not want to change. So whenever a change comes of any kind, whether a change in thought, whether a change in life, whether in a way of life, whether in a mode of living, tamas says, I have had enough. I won't change. You can't rationalize it, whatever you may say. A tamasic person says, let me remain whatever I am. That's how we heard it as a child. Our parents said, okay, we understand all this, but we are very happy with whatever we are following. So tamasic tamas is the principle of inertia. It does not like to move. Rajas, on the other hand, wants change for the sake of change. So people get bored in Auroville, so they go to Kodaikanal, they get bored in Kodaikanal, they go to some other Ramanashram, they get bored in Tiruvannamalai, they go. It's like hunting for methods and procedures. Ultimately, you will come back to the same point, feet of the Divine Mother, if this is the yoga. But they like to go because it provides a change. So Rajas operates in that way. What is it that you can't find here, which you need to? I'm not saying it in a sectarian way, but actually having read all these different works, ultimately this is the completest thing. But people need to change, which is fine. But Rajogun impels people to change. They can't live one place forever. We see how Satprem would like to go out, wanderlust, and mother would keep telling him, but she would allow, it's okay. You go, you search. And then ultimately she tells him that ultimately you will have to come here. And he comes and he says, what is missing? And she says, what is missing is the spirit of service. You don't know the joy of service. So, but that's okay. Rajas likes to change and change for the sake of change. So it will change from one to another. In human life, it will be one object to another object, one house to another, one car to another in ordinary life. But even in inner life, doctor shopping, window shopping, of the guru shopping, all this continue. Method shopping, so people continue that. And of course, it's Rajas. Sattva, on the contrary, it binds by creating a routine. People often ask, for instance, in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, what is the routine? What is your routine? People sometimes ask, what is your everyday routine? So I tell them, please don't ask, because you will be embarrassed, I'll be embarrassed. Because there is no routine. Basically, yes, the structure of life provides you with a routine. You have a work to do at some point. At 8:30, you have to be in the dispensary, so you go to the dispensary. And then you have to be there for a certain point of time. Then like here, we have to take a class, we come. That's a routine. But routine, the Sattvic people would start with everything is done in a certain way. So when you go to the dispensary, you must do in a certain way, certain ritual, maybe sit in a certain way, maybe immediately do a 5-minute meditation. When you eat food, you start with a kind of external ritual. Now all these things are fine. They are good. Sattva is a good thing, principle, because you are trying to discipline and organize your life. But sometimes we become slave of the discipline and forget the truth that is behind. That is the problem. So we become very finicky, as I said. So there I know someone who went to a place to eat, and after a good meeting on Sanskrit and all that. So people speaking only Sanskrit. Now this is carrying it too far. There is a person in the ashram, or was. He would speak to you only in Sanskrit. Now you don't understand Sanskrit. You know English, Hindi. Can you speak in English and Hindi? But no. Now this becomes a kind of rigidity in its own right. So when they went there to a place, eating place, they were not happy with steel plates or any other plate. They wanted pattal. Pattal, what is that? Leaf. Now it's okay, it's good to eat on leaf, but if you make fuss about eating on banana leaf or any leaf, then you are getting bound by that kind of way of life which sattva can bind very terribly, rigidly. So you cannot see the vastness of God, cannot experience the infinity of the divine, cannot hear Him in the babble of a child or in the passing of the breeze. Look at how Sri Aurobindo describes in Savitri when he, I presume, looking out of Baroda, he must have seen, that's my imagination, but he describes in Book 1, Canto 1, that how when dawn comes, suddenly the winds, the air becomes it brings all these perfumes and the sounds like mantras, and the hill becomes the altar from which everything is rising and nature is carrying it to the divine. Now this is a vision of life which is very difficult for the sattvic mind to conceive. Because sattvic mind must do a certain kind of puja in a certain temple in a certain way. Just the other day I was contemplating what is Matri Mandir, just to say. Now Matri Mandir is beautiful and one should go. I mean, it's an amazing gift of the grace. But look at why she's named it Matri Mandir. This is what I was contemplating. This is my thoughts. I'm not saying it is anyhow. It got revealed to me. It is the temple of the Divine Mother. And then I realized this too must become the temple of the Divine Mother. Divine Mother dwells here. This body should be the temple of the Divine Mother. So, if we can create this temple inside, soundless oratory, argent floor, in a spiritual consciousness, completely humble, can we not say that Sri Aurobindo is the living temple of the Divine Mother? Can there ever be any greater temple than that? So, that temple is so beautiful, it should help us to ourselves become a living temple of the Divine Mother. So, there is the sattvic nature which also binds us. So, nature moves us through in the wheel and we feel we are doing good. Sattvic nature can become terribly there. We are doing everything right according to the checklist. But you have forgotten that the Divine Himself doesn't act according to strict checklist of human beings. That's the context of the war. Because Arjun will not fight. But Divine has taken him to that point where your checklist of healing. So this is where we see that he talks about, Sankhya speaks about the witness, the Sakshi, but the Gita also says this Sakshi is also the sanctioner, Anumanta. And this sanctioner also becomes the Ishvara. This is not there in Sankhya. So it takes one higher and higher. So we need not go so much into Sankhya, which but just passingly, page 73. 13 other principles. So they are the 5 elements of matter, which is the 5 tattvas. They are not physical water, physical air, as people say, but they are principles or forces of being. So space is that ether which can expand to any extent. So that's how space can expand, because its principle is ether within it. Then comes air, which is the principle where you see first the frictional energy is beginning to come. Then you have water, which is the power of attraction and repulsion. You have Agni Tat, which is the principle of heat and light. And you have the earth element, which is the force that binds all these together. So these are the 5 elements. To experience these 5 elements, they are the 5 senses. So nature has created, because for its play. Why it is playing, that question Sankhya philosophers don't take up. It says things are the way they are. So each of the senses can experience something corresponding to that. So each ether has the quality of sound, and we have ear to perceive the sound. So similarly, light, the quality of vision, and the sight is there to perceive this light. That means Agni Tattva. So equally, the principle of water, it flows, and something in a sense should be able to perceive water. So that is the taste. Principle of matter. Air is touch. Air, we can experience it as touch. And then we have the smell. Earth. So that's why even today earth by smell. And many animals by the smell they understand this, my child. And even today when rain falls on earth, that smell of earth. So these are the 5 senses through which the 5 elements are perceived. And the mind is the 6th sense which coordinates and creates the image. Now you see what a scientific way. It's amazing. You leave aside the Ishvara aspect, but how beautifully they have explained. Of course they don't explain why it is there. But how it is there, they have explained as well or even better than what modern science explains. So these are the 5 elemental energies, states of matter, and they are the 5 senses through which you experience, and then the responses which we give, and then the sense of separativeness because of the ahankar, and then there is the mahat, which is the principle of cosmic force, which is operating in nature, and consciousness which comes from the Purusha. So all like perfectly explained. So the 5 elements of matter and the 5 sense relations, 13 other principles, page 73, constitute the subjective aspect of the cosmic energy, buddhi or mahat, ahankar, manas and its 10 sense functions. 5 of knowledge, 5 of actions. 5 jnanendriya, the 5 senses, and the 5 karmendriya which we know. Manas, mind, is the original sense which perceives all objects and reacts upon them. So when people say, yes, God is there, but He is like a cosmic energy. Basically, you belong to the Sankhya school of thought, which is atheistic. It doesn't require any deep thought to understand, but just a little bit of analysis that there is a cosmic energy, anybody can feel it. But that cosmic energy does not necessarily mean the Divine Mother, not at all. It is a mechanical energy. To say that there is a cosmic power, that's what Sankhya is saying. But Sankhya is an atheistic school. So all this he reveals to us. So Buddhi, the discriminating principle, is at once intelligence and will. It is that power in nature which discriminates and coordinates. And Ahankar, the ego sense. So that is how he reveals. And then what is the method of Sankhya, which Shri Krishna would use to get rid of, next page 74, the last line of the continuing paragraph. To get rid of this delusion is the first step toward the liberation of the soul from nature and her works. So that will develop subsequently, that your buddhi can be completely turned towards nature, involved in it, and therefore deluded. But the same buddhi can turn upward and inward, and thereby it becomes freed from the delusion that this is real, this is going to happen. Actually, Sankhya doesn't talk about reality and unreality. This is real, of course. But it will stop thinking that it will stop experiencing the pleasure, pain, all these things, because it will become a witness. You will be separated from the activities of nature, which Sri Aurobindo will elaborate subsequently. So, all this he reveals to us, and actually we have already discussed this aspect, but we'll just quickly touch upon it. Page 77. But there is one deviation of capital importance. The Purusha is regarded as one, not many, in Sankhya. For the free, immaterial, immobile, eternal, immutable self of the Gita, but for one detail, is a Vedantic description of the eternal, passive, immobile, immutable Purusha of the Sankhyas. So we see that Gita has this element which is in common. In Sankhya you have the Purusha, again, immutable witness. In the Upanishad also we have this as the Brahman state, Atman, and in the Gita also Akshara Brahma. So all these are common to all of them. This Purusha is free from nature. Actually, Purusha is always free from nature, but it reflects. But in Upanishad, it can get involved in nature, and thereby you have this sense of bondage. So, next paragraph, he is witness, source of the consent, by reflection, upholder of the work of nature, Sakshi, Anumanta, Bharata, but nothing more. So this we understand that to take a practical example, when something is happening and you get involved in it, how you get involved, your consciousness takes interest in it or is attached to it or gets engaged in it. So initially you are just watching, but you are not just watching, you are beginning to react and respond. Now even these reactions and responses are action which are going into the sum total of things. And then at a point you jump into the fray. And you create more mess. Now somebody else will watch and he will also jump into the fray. Because we don't even understand we are jumping into it. And it is nature which is going on. Nature is playing. So the Sankhya would tell first, withdraw, witness. Witness is an impersonal state. It is not getting involved into what's happening, not engaging with it. So this state of inner freedom is necessary. But it is not the end. According to Sankhya, it is the end. You become a witness, observe this nature, don't react, don't get involved in it, don't get engaged in it, don't get interested in it. Naturally, it will be very difficult to drive a car if you do that state. And those days there was no such problem. So, people were walking on foot, Rishi Munis lived in the forest below a tree. So it was fine. You can look at an animal and be a witness. Don't react. Probably the animal will not sense danger and go away from you. But if you go to the city and say, I just want to be a witness. I have had these experiences, that's why I'm saying. Driving my scooter, suddenly I started hearing this it's a voice, but a passage that be a witness, don't react, be a witness, don't react. It sprang like a mantra. So I used to do this while driving everything, becoming a witness. And I was hit by a 3-ton lorry of the army. So my scooter is gone and I am thrown aside. But because of this caution, nothing affected me. Nothing. In fact, I got up picked up the scooter, and because I was in uniform, the army person was feeling so, sir, so sorry, sir, anything happened? So nothing. I said, no, don't worry, everything is fine. I started the scooter, it kicked all right, and I reached home. It just left no trace. So the witness can go to that extent. I mean, even if something happens, you are a witness. But it's difficult to practice to its ultimate extreme, but it is very powerful to liberate us from this delusion of me and mine. But the Purusha of the Gita is also the Lord of nature. He is Ishvara. You can change it, but not in the ignorance. First be free from the ignorance. Then yes, you can enter into it. So the Gita first talks about freedom from ignorance, and then it becomes the Anumanta, it becomes the Ishvara. So this is what it communicates, and then we'll stop with this last bit. Page 79. Thus there are three Purushas, not mentioned here. The Shara, the Akshara, the Uttama. Shara, the mobile, the mutable in nature, we have already spoken about it. Swabhava, it's the Shara, because of that each thing has its own unique property or unique, looks like an intelligent operation. Why? Because the Purusha is reflected in it. It is the various becoming of the soul. The Purusha here is the multiplicity of the divine being. It is the Purusha multiple, not apart from, but in Prakriti. That's what is the Sharabhava. One Purusha, appearing many. Akshara, the immobile, the immutable, is the silent and inactive self. It is the unity of the divine being. Witness of nature, but not involved in its movement. Most yogas will stop here. Either the one is appearing many, or withdrawing, you identify with the one. But where does Gita bring in this higher element? Purusha free from Prakriti and the works. The Uttama is the Lord, the Supreme Brahman, the Supreme Self, who possesses both the immutable unity and the mobile multiplicity. Thereby we all belong to the Lord. It is He who holds all this together. It is the foundation of the highest Bhakti Yoga. So why Bhakti Yoga comes in with the Gita? Because before the Gita, you don't have this Uttam Purusha. It is hinted in the Vedas, without a doubt. But when you talk about the Uttam Purusha, the highest, whose portions we are, who holds this universe, us and everybody else, then the relational aspect develops. So, page 80, the last page. The Gita affirms, on the contrary, that the Lord by His nature becomes the Jiva. That's how we have become, we are portions of Him. How is that possible, since there are only the 24 principles of the cosmic energy and no others? Yes, says the divine teacher in effect, that is a perfectly valid account for the apparent operations of the cosmic Prakriti with its three gunas. And the relation attributed to Purusha and Prakriti there is also quite valid and of great use for the practical purposes of the involution and the withdrawal. He is not cancelling the Sankhya, but he is adding something which changes the entire meaning of a life. But this is only the lower Prakriti of the three modes. So Gita brings in this element of the higher Prakriti, which is missing in Sankhya and the traditional Vedantic schools, all of which speak about Prakriti and the three modes. And Shri Krishna mentions it. There is a higher, a supreme, a conscient and divine nature, and it is that which has become the individual soul, the Jiva. So para Prakriti Jiva Bhuta. And Shri Krishna says that this Sankhya he describes, that this is the lower nature. Now I will tell you about my higher nature. He describes his higher super nature. And then he describes his Aishwarya, the Vibhuti is all over, around in everything. So this is missing in pre-Gita era of thought, Indian philosophy. That's why the Gita is not just simply an extension of Hindu philosophy. It has added something new. It is based, fundamentals are same, but it adds. Prakriti is there, Purusha is there, but it develops beyond Upanishad. Just as Sri Aurobindo, yes, Prakriti is there, Purusha is there, the Purushottama is there, but he goes one step further. That's how Hindu philosophy in Sanatana Dharma is developed. In the lower nature, each being appears as the ego. In the higher, he is the individual Purusha. In other words, multiplicity is part of the spiritual nature of the One. This individual soul is myself. In the creation, it is a partial manifestation of me. Myself here is Sri Krishna saying that this individual soul is myself. And in the lower nature, it appears as the ego, but in the creation, it is a partial manifestation of me. Mamaeva ansha. And see how powerfully he writes. And it possesses all my powers. The soul within possesses all the powers of the divine in a seed form. It has to develop it through a process of life. It is witness. Yes, but it is also giver of the sanction. Anumanta, Sakshi, Anumanta, upholder, Bharta, knower, the Gyata, Lord, Ishvara. All these which I am is also the soul is potentially capable of it. It descends into the lower nature and thinks itself bound by action. So to enjoy the lower being, it can draw back and know itself as the passive Purusha free from all action. It can rise above the three gunas and liberate it from the bondage of action, yet possess action even as I do myself. And by adoration of the Purushottama and union with him, it can enjoy wholly its divine nature. And we may add and participate in this great collective work by adding to the progressive divine manifestation. So this background is important because otherwise generally we have all this, no, you just turn within, become a witness. We are going back at least 7,000-8,000 years behind. Because that is already developed. Sankhya spoke about it, nothing new. But Sri Krishna adds and Sri Aurobindo brings something still greater. And that we will turn to subsequently step by step.